I don't like to call myself a procrastinator. I like to think of myself as a person who is highly motivated by deadlines. If I have a deadline, I will almost always get the task done before the deadline, maybe just a little before the deadline, but I will get it done. So it helps me to have a deadline. In our reading from Paul in 2 Corinthians today, Paul gives us a deadline. Now is the acceptable time, he says. Now is the day of salvation. In other words, don't procrastinate about your faith any longer. Paul is talking to the Corinthians about reconciliation. He urges them to be reconciled to him and to each other, and be reconciled to God. Be reconciled to God, he says, now is the time. Don't put it off any longer. Today is Ash Wednesday, and Ash Wednesday encourages us to think about the distance between us and God. In a little while we will say the Litany of Penitence that lists all the ways we have put a distance between us and God. Our self-indulgent appetites and ways, our intemperate love of worldly goods and comforts, our negligence in prayer and worship, and so on. You know, I think we all know that if we're in a relationship and we don't keep working on the relationship, that eventually there will be a distance that comes between us. And it's the same with our relationship with God. If we don't put some effort into the relationship, pretty soon there gets to be a distance between us and God. So today, Ash Wednesday, is a good time for us to think about that relationship. How we can return to God and renew our relationship. Our Old Testament lesson today from the prophet Joel says, blow the trumpet in Zion, sound the alarm on my holy mountain. Return to the Lord our God, for he is gracious and merciful, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love. The prophet is trying to wake up the people of Israel. They've become complacent, and he's trying to give them a sense of urgency. Now, I don't think Ash Wednesday is a time for us to beat ourselves up with guilt. It's not meant to make us feel bad about ourselves, but it's a time of renewal. Return to the Lord your God. So I would suggest 3 ways to think about renewal. One is the past, one is the present, and one is the future. First, we might think about the beginnings of our faith. Where did our faith come from? For many of us, it began with our families, or may have begun some other way with church, from a particular person, maybe from a youth group, or maybe by reading or learning about religions. We have all kinds of ways that we come to God. But think about how you came to faith in the beginning. I know for myself, when I was a kid, I was saturated in church. The Sunday school, church, choir, youth group, youth camp, all of that. And that was the beginnings, but later I had to make that my own. It had become mine instead of just what my parents wanted for me. The second thing is the present. Where am I at right now in my faith? Am I at a good place where my relationship with God is strong? Where the sacraments are meaningful? Where I feel connected to the church and to the community? Is it time for me to make an honest assessment of where I'm at in my relationship with God? And the third thing, the future. How can I deepen my faith in Jesus Christ? How can I come to know him better? What concrete steps can I take to become a better follower of Jesus? And how can the church become more meaningful to me? The classic time-tested method is by reading the Bible, by reading and meditating on God's holy word. And one way to do that is just to sit down with the Bible and open it up and start reading. A lot of people recommend that you read the Gospels because they're the story of Jesus' life and his sayings. It might be better during Lent to read one of the Gospels. If you read a chapter a day of one of the Gospels, you get through that whole Gospel in the season of Lent. Or you might want to use one of the many resources you can find online, like The Way of Love that's found on the Episcopal Church website. Our women's group is going to use that for their study during Lent. And prayer is another classic resource for renewing our faith. Finding a prayer practice that works for you, and then commit yourself to it. Or helping others is another classic way of renewing your faith. Find some consistent way of helping others during Lent and see how it helps you come closer to God. Now is the time. Now is the day of salvation. In a few moments we're going to receive the ashes on our forehead and be reminded of our mortality. We're not going to live forever. We only have a limited time when we can come close to God. And Ash Wednesday reminds us of that. Annie Lamott is a very popular writer of spiritual books. And she says that she was raised by two very intellectual, atheistic parents. And by the time she was in her 20s, she was a raging alcoholic. And she ended up coming to a church in Marin County, California, a progressive church, because she liked what the pastor was saying. She wanted to know about this higher power that the preacher was talking about. And she says that in 1986, a year later, with the help of AA, she finally became sober and began to work things out. And she started this long journey of faith. She says there are three things that she learned. One is, I can't. The second is, God can. And the third is, let God. The third step of Alcoholics Anonymous is to let go. And she says that's what made a big difference for her. Now, she quotes AA's big book, which says, abandon yourself to God as you understand God. Admit your faults to him and to your fellows. Clear away the wreckage of your past. Give freely of what you find and join us. We shall be with you in the fellowship of the Spirit. I think we can say the same thing about the church. The journey of Lent is a journey of letting go, of returning to God, and preparing for Easter Day. So, return to the Lord your God. Don't put it off or procrastinate. Now is the day of salvation.